CBS News foreign correspondent Debora Patta has reported extensively across the Middle East. She saw the bombing of a hospital in Syria and ultimately the fall of the city of Aleppo. She kicks off our Reporter's Notebook series.
It is really the consequences of war that have an emotional impact on me as a correspondent, and I firmly believe we have a responsibility to cover those consequences. The war in Syria was always one-sided. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad effectively waged war against his own people after they rose up in rebellion, and the fall of Aleppo was no different. The Syrian military, backed by Russian air power, pounded that city with impunity towards the end of 2016 as they tried to drive out the rebels and regain control of Aleppo. And as is always the case, it was the civilians who really, through an act of geography, bore the brunt of that pounding. When our team first arrived in the city, I was struck by the relentless sound of shelling, explosions, gunfire. At first, I would jump every time it was particularly loud or seemed close by. Then after a day or two, it becomes background noise. But imagine having to live with that for years on end. The most haunting images were of children. I interviewed these young children. One of them, 13-year-old Amal, told me she hadn't been to school for 2 years. As we were talking, a shell landed nearby, and the group of children barely flinched. It was all too familiar to even bother them. And then there was 7-year-old Abdul Ghani Tarab, who was eating lunch one day when shrapnel hit him in the stomach. But he lived on the eastern side of this divided city where rebels were still holed up and which was being bombarded mercilessly by Syria and Russia. At this point, there were no functioning hospitals in eastern Aleppo, and so it took them 15 days before they could reach a proper hospital and he could receive life-saving surgery. Imagine being his parents and having to listen to him moan in agony and be unable to do anything about it. Hospitals were systematically targeted and destroyed by the Syrian military in the eastern part of Aleppo, which meant that makeshift clinics that had no real resources were the only place people trapped inside the east could turn to. Then, whenever there was a brief lull in the fighting, civilians were faced with an impossible choice: stay put and risk the daily bombings, flee and face sniper fire on one of the few remaining routes out of the city. But still, people fled on foot, in wheelbarrows, any way they could. Aleppo was, in its heyday, home to 2 million residents and held treasures of early civilization. Well, we didn't see much civilization during the fall of Aleppo. There was one image that captured that in the worst possible way. When this man's wife became ill, he wheeled her through the streets in search of help. But there was none to be found, and so all he could do was say goodbye. But there was one moment of joy amidst all this suffering, and explains just how divided this city was, with the east held by rebels, the western part of Aleppo under government control. We witnessed this incredible family scene. The mother had been in eastern rebel-held Aleppo and her sons in the west. They had joined the Syrian army and so couldn't visit their mother. They had not seen each other in 5 years until this moment, which we caught on camera. I think often of the people we met in Aleppo and of the pain war inflicts in so many different ways, not just on the body, but on the soul. And I wonder, now that the bombs have subsided, how those people are doing and how they are dealing with the trauma and scars that are buried so deeply inside as they simply try to carry on and rebuild their lives. Debora Patta, CBS News, Johannesburg, South Africa.